Hello and good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, wherever you're joining us from today. It's great to have you with us as part of this Revelation series. This series is a study of prophecy, the end times, and the book of Revelation. We are on Revelation chapter 18. So, as we've come through the study up to Revelation chapter 18, we have seen several events taking place. Today, we're going to dive into Revelation 18 and try to understand this. Kind of a mysterious chapter that we're given here in the book of Revelation. So at Revelation 18, where we have come from through this point is we have looked at the judgments of God. We have seen that God has given some warnings. The warnings were first demonstrated as He gave us these seven seals. The seven seals, when they were broken, they unleashed and they led to what was called the seven trumpets. The seven trumpets were the final warnings given to mankind before the wrath was going to come. We saw at the last trumpet right here, at the last trumpet was the rapture of the church. If you just read Revelation for what it says, that's where the first time that it references it, it's mentioned there that the last trumpet. This corresponds with what Paul says when he talks about at the last trumpet, the church, we will be gathered, we will meet him in the air. And so the idea of the rapture happens there. Once the church is removed, now you have the seven bowls of wrath. You have the seven bowls of wrath that are poured out on the world, and we have seen those as we've gone through, gotten up to this point, as we looked at chapter 16 of the book of Revelation. Last time we were together, we looked at chapter 17, and in chapter 17 we saw God's judgment and his punishment of what was called Babylon. So this is going to be important for our study today. We have the idea of Babylon. Now, the idea of Babylon, as we read chapter 17, was the Antichrist and the beastly system. This was a spiritual Babylon. Now, there was a literal Babylon that happened. If you go back and you read through the book of Daniel, you're going to see the literal Babylon, that the Israelites were taken into captivity, and they were taken out of their homes and gone. They went to Iran, modern day where Babylon would have been, the Babylonian Empire, but that's modern day Iran today. It was a spiritual Babylon that we saw in Revelation chapter 17. And in Revelation chapter 18, we're going to see another iteration of Babylon, but this time it's not a spiritual. This time it is a physical and it is a material Babylon that we are going to see. Now, many scholars think that this is two different references of two different areas that we have. One, we have the spiritual, which is the Antichrist and the beastly empire, and then you have this physical material country and city that is being referred to. And I think really the best way to look at this is that they're both connected, that they both are referencing something different, but they're both very connected in what they're trying to explain and trying to understand. Now, if you read through chapter 18 on your own, you're going to find that it is a little bit confusing, and it's hard to follow some of the things that are being said. There's 24 verses in chapter 18. It's hard to try to comprehend. But if you keep in your mind the fact that this is a physical material Babylon, so I want you to think of it this way as we get into this, that this is the economic capital of the world. Okay. Today, as we sit today, here in 2022, right now, the United States is still considered the economic capital of the world. We still have the reserve currency. We are still in a position where most of the economic decisions, most of the money flow comes connected to or through the United States. We are in many ways still the economic capital of the world, but that is quickly changing. And if you read and you listen to economists that will talk about this, they are very convinced that we will be losing our reserve currency status, that there is a real decline of the empire that is the United States. I don't know if you know the name Ray Dalio, but Ray Dalio, who I would recommend going out and reading his book. His latest book. He talks about the collapsing empire that was the United States. He looks at several empires across across time and how they rose and how they fell. And really, the United States is following that same parallel. of what had happened to other empires as they lost their reserve currency status and they really became more insignificant in the operation of the world. And so right now we're looking at the United States probably losing that reserve currency status. We're going to see great inflation, hyperinflation. We're going to see really a lot of turmoil, I believe, in the United States over the next several years. And as a result, there's going to be a new economic capital of the world. Now, this economic capital of the world, Revelation chapter 18, is referring to this place, this new economic capital of the world, that this is the physical and material Babylon of the world. So you have a spiritual Babylon, which is the Antichrist and the beastly empire, but you also have an economic capital Babylon that has become the material capital of the world, that all of the money flows are going to flow through there. Now, many have speculated that that could easily be China. That will be the next economic capital of the world, the next reserve currency. But it could also be a Middle Eastern country, a Middle Eastern nation that really corresponds to the spiritual Babylon that we looked at in Revelation 17. So let's dive into Revelation 18. Again, I want you just to keep that in the back of your mind, that this Babylon is talking about the economic, physical capital of the world, the material capital of the world, as we study this together today. So let's start into this, chapter 18, verse 1. All right, so let me give you just a parallel idea out of Revelation 17, and we'll look at this parallel idea in Revelation chapter 18. In Revelation 17, we had this idea of what was called the Mystery Babylon. Now, the symbol of that was the harlot. It was the harlot woman, the prostitute woman. It's identified with the beastly empire. It's identified with the Antichrist, and they are guilty, this Babylonian empire, this mystery harlot, this mystery Babylon is guilty of religious abominations. And this religious abominations was leading people astray religiously, turning away from following who the Lord really is. In chapter 18, you have what's called the commercial Babylon. So this is not the mystery Babylon. Now this is the commercial Babylon. The symbol here is not the harlot woman, but the symbol here is this great city. It's going to be identified with a port city, so it's going to be somewhat coastal. It's going to be a great city, a great marketplace. It's going to be guilty of greed and self-indulgence and destroyed by a sudden act of God. So we have these parallel ideas of this idea of Babylon. Now, the idea of Babylon, if you go back and you read the books of Isaiah and Jeremiah, you're going to see the reference of Babylon a lot. Usually what's associated with Babylon is just anti-God. Anti-God's kingdom, anti-God's will, anti-God's power. It's really a symbolic picture of the world itself that has walked away and rejected who God is. Now, again, these are both intertwined, chapter 17 and chapter 18, but again, they're referencing something very different. They're referencing this idea of a religious system and a commercial economic system. You know, it's interesting that Babylon would be modern day Iran, also crossing the border into Iraq. I don't know if you would remember during the time when Saddam Hussein was very outspoken about his plans for the world, but he wanted to see a restored Babylon in all of its glory. And obviously he can no longer do that and accomplish that, but there are others in that same region that want to see the same thing. They want to see a resurgence of this symbolic Babylon, this literal Babylon, this commercial capital Babylon, and this religious system. So it's a Middle Eastern system. It is a symbolic system, and it stands for everything that's against and anti who God is. That's why you have an anti-Christ. Babylon is an anti-religious group that are anti who God is. You have the Babylon is the great city. This is anti-God's plan. So all of this, it goes against who God is, and it's really set in contrast to what God had designed for the world, even what he had designed for his country that he loved, the country of Israel. Well, let's read this together. So John writes this, "After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his glory. He cried out with a mighty voice, saying, 'Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a den for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, and for every unclean bird, for every unclean and detestable beast. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the fury of her immorality. The kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich off the power of her self-indulgence. And so what you see here, what you're having play out here, is that every nation, so all of the nations of the earth, all the nations, have drunk the wine of the fury of her immorality. In other words, all of the nations of the world have gotten into bed with this empire. So you have the spiritual empire, which is the Babylonian spiritual empire, which is the picture of the Antichrist religious system. And this is, in my opinion, going to be the Islamic system of the day. Then you have the economic, so we put the economic and the material empire, which is also going to be a Middle Eastern empire. It's going to be in the same area, but it's going to really control a lot of the finances of the world, and this is going to be a place where demonic activity is very much taking place. This is not a godly place. This is not God ordained. This is not God's will. This is not God's kingdom. This is a spiritual anti-God system that is going to be established. Now, all of the nations have gotten into bed with this immoral system. They've gotten rich off of this immoral system. They have really lined their pockets off of this. You see great kings, you see politicians, you see leaders, and they're the ones that are getting wealthy off of all of this. So think about in the Middle Eastern system now, in a lot of the countries now, you have this great oil reserve that is happening, and look at how rich specific leaders have gotten off of this. If you look at Saudi Arabia, for example, the ruling family has been in power for generations. They have been kings, and they have all of the wealth and all of the opulence. And so there are many other merchants that do business with them that are part of this. So you're going to have the Middle Eastern system that is producing incredible wealth, and you're going to have all of the nations getting in bed with this system, and they're going to be getting wealthy as a result of this, especially the politicians, especially the kings, especially the rulers. It's not for the everyday citizen. It's not the common class. It is the ones that are in power and have leadership. So the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality with her. They've gotten in bed with this system. And the merchants of the earth, they have grown rich off of the power of her self-indulgence. So you have different companies, you have different leaders, you have different groups that are getting wealthy off of what is going on in this economic Babylon that is really there in that day. And so there's an announcement that is made by the angel. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Now this idea of fallen, fallen, this is like a phrase that is often repeated, and it's really they are in a position of being condemned. They are under damnation. Fallen, fallen is a curse that is being spoken over this mystery Babylon, this Babylon that is this economic really capital of that region in that area. So let's keep going through this. So you've got the picture in mind, you've got the idea in mind that we're talking about through the rest of this chapter. Then John says, I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, lest you participate in her sins and receive her plagues. So this idea, come out of her, my people, that God is speaking to the Kedoshim, to the saints, to the holy ones, to the ones that are following the Lord, to Jewish believers that have given their hearts to the Lord, to Christians that are in the area. They are the Kedoshim, and God is giving them a warning, come out. If you don't come out, you are going to participate in her sins and receive her plagues. Now, this phrase, lest you participate in her sins. God has called the Christian to come out and be separate. We are in the world. You've heard this phrase many times. We are in the world. We are not of the world. We are not to be participating in the sins and the ways that the world operates. And I think that many of us are guilty of participating in the world. We participate and just join right in with the world system rather than stepping back and saying, you know what, should I be doing this? Should I be participating in what the world is participating in? Should I be allowing myself to be distracted by the world's system, the Babylonian system, and really the anti-God system, and following along with it? If you do not pull back from this, if you do not leave this, you will be under the plague. You will be under the wrath of God. You won't escape the wrath of God unless you pull back and separate yourself from this system. Now, it doesn't mean you escape the world. You will live in the world. It's just that the world will not have hold over you. You will not be participating in her sins and therefore receive her plagues. Now, this is in particular, specifically to the end times events, to this mystery Babylon, this world's system Babylon, this city Babylon. Pull yourself out of that. Do not participate in that. And I think it's a good reminder for all of us to examine ourselves and say, have we really separated ourselves from the world system? Have we really given ourselves over to the Lord, and we don't allow the world to have a hold over us any longer? Verse 6, pay her back just as she has paid out, and give her back double for her deeds. In the cup she has mixed, mix a double dose for her. As she has exalted herself and indulged herself in luxury, so give her the same measure of torment and grief. For in her heart she says, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, I shall never see grief. Now, what is he talking about here? Well, the she word is that reference to Babylon. The she is the Babylonian system, the world's system, this specific economic system, this specific city, this Babylon that is being referred to. That's the she. She has paid out something horrible. She's going to reap even worse. She has been persecuting the Christians. She's going to receive even more. She's indulged herself in greed and opulence and finance, but she's going to receive a double portion of the punishment that comes from this. And essentially, this Babylonian city says, I am the queen, I am the ruler, I'm not broken, I'm not a widow, I'm not grieving, I will never see grief, I'm the one that's in control of all of this. So you see this economic world that thinks that, well, we have figured this out, we are ruling, we are in charge, we are powerful, that's all going to turn and they're going to lose everything. Now, as we see the world marching toward a one world economy or a one world currency, whether we ever get to that, we don't know. There's nothing in the Bible that says we will have a one world economic system, but it seems like it could possibly be moving in that way. That's just, again, speculation, but it sure seems like it could be moving in that way because of the things that we are seeing that are happening in the world around us. Regardless, this mystery city Babylon, this economic capital, will basically say, I am the ruler, I'm in charge, I have created this system, this will never collapse, I know what I'm doing here. Well, that's not the case. There's going to be a great collapse toward this city that is going to happen. Well, let's keep marching our way through this here today. For this reason her plagues will arrive in a single day, death and grief and famine, and she shall be burned down with fire. So what is the reason? For this reason? Well, because of what we just read, because she has set herself up as the queen who has all the power, because all of the nations have been getting into bed with her, because she has set up this economic system thinking that she is now controlling the entire world with this economic system. Now, because of this, all of the plagues are going to come in a single day toward this city, death and grief and famine, and she shall be burned down with fire. Now, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we know it's going to be one single day that city is going to be utterly wiped out and destroyed. Whether it's a natural disaster or it's a plague that happens or just this fire that happens, whatever it is, it's going to have severe consequences upon this city, and it will happen in one day. Why? For mighty is Adonai Elohim who judges her. The Lord God Almighty, the one who is going to judge, the one who holds the control of the final end times events, the God who has the power to control all of his creation. He is going to bring judgment against the Babylon, the spiritual side of it, and against the economic Babylon, who is the material control side of all of this. God's judgment is going to be poured out upon these systems that are all anti-God. Then the kings of the earth who have committed the sexual immorality. So they have gotten into bed with the system. They've gotten wealthy off of this system. They've indulged in luxury with her shall weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. So all of the people that have gotten wealthy, all of the kings, all of the leaders, all of the rulers realize that, our gravy train is gone, and they are going to weep over this sight of the destruction of this city that is known in the Bible as Babylon. Now, we don't know what city that's going to be. We don't know how that's going to work out quite yet, but there will be a judgment of God against the spiritual Babylon and the material Babylon, the picture of the anti-religious system of the world and the anti-material system of the world, that all of those systems go against who God is. They will stand far off, these kings of the earth who have committed sexual immorality, and they will stand far off because of the terror of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, O great city, O Babylon, the mighty city, for in a single hour your judgment has come. So there is going to be some incredible judgment that will happen in a single day, in a single hour even, of the judgment of God that is being poured out upon these systems. And again, just think of those systems. The spiritual Babylon, the material Babylon, both are very anti-God, and God's judgment is going to be poured out upon both of these systems. Well, verses 11 through 14. And the merchants of the earth, the ones that have gotten wealthy off of this Babylon, will weep and they will mourn for this destruction. They will weep and mourn because of the events that they have seen unfold. They will weep and mourn because of their gravy train is now gone. How is their wealth going to be procured now at this point? Because when this happens, no one buys their merchandise anymore. So what this will cause, this whatever catastrophe is going to happen that will shut down that system, nobody will then buy from the kings or the merchants who have gotten their materials from this mystery Babylon. So you could think of this economic turmoil that will be created, or this down the line effect that will happen as it is that if this mystery Babylon is the economic capital, maybe they become the reserve currency and it's utterly destroyed. Nobody's going to want to take that money anymore. Nobody's going to want to buy anything from these merchants anymore. People are going to be hunkering down and thinking, what can we do? How can we make our way through this? Now, these merchants had incredible merchandise. They have, according to what John was seeing, now again, John is seeing it from his perspective, but we're going to see it more from the perspective of the world today. He says it was shipments of gold and silver and precious stones. That's just the way to trade the currency, pearls as well. Then you have fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet. That's the clothing that happens, the clothing lines, the material that is needed for clothing. And then you have all kinds of products made of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble. This is construction types of materials, or this is luxury, opulent type of materials that you would put into a home. And then you have wine, oil, fine flour, and wheat, cattle, sheep, horses, and chariots. And that could be everything from our food, from our, grocery stores that are buying the food items. Then you have chariots. Those could easily be the vehicle industry, the transportation industry. And then you have slaves, that is human souls. And so there's human souls, a human toil component to all of these things, because those are the workers that produce everything, and they're going to be out of work. So you could see that this could be a entire economic catastrophe upon the world, that now nobody can work. There's no currency that is changing hands. Nobody's buying or selling any merchandise. Nobody's making anything. Nobody's building any homes, remodeling any homes. Nobody's buying food. They've either stocked up or they have nothing that they can buy. And so all of this is an incredible catastrophe that is going to happen. Now, again, the church is removed by this point if it follows the timeline of the book of Revelation. But this is all of the things that are going to be poured out upon the world. Now, there's arguments made that chapter 17 and 18 are part of, they're like a backstory of things that are happening in the midst of the tribulation. The other idea is they happen at the end of the tribulation. We don't know exactly when that's going to be, but God is going to bring judgment against the world. Now, the fruit of your soul's desire, verse 14, has gone from you, and all the expensive and beautiful things are lost to you. Never again will people find them. So this is complete and utter economic disaster that will really fall upon the world. It will be economic disaster upon the city. It will be on the whole world's system. You can think of the world system as the Babylonian system. You have the Babylonian spiritual system that has judgment been poured out upon them as well. So all of the world's systems that are anti-God are going to collapse under everything that is happening in chapters 17 and 18. All right, verses 15 through 20. The merchants of these things who became rich from her shall stand far off for fear of her torment, weeping and mourning, saying, Alas, alas, O great city, clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in a single hour so much wealth has been ruined. Think of how much wealth could possibly be ruined at the collapse of a stock market, wiped out in a single day. The collapse of the cryptocurrency market, the collapse of the commodities market, the collapse of the bond market, the collapse of one country. How much wealth is ruined in a single moment because of the collapse of an economic system? We could see something like that happen in our lifetime. That's why people are told to diversify your investments, to not ever have all of your stuff in any one thing, because how much wealth could be ruined through the collapse of a single economic system? Well, that's exactly what's happening here. That all of the merchants, all of the people who have been participating in this, maybe it's, picture it in your mind as the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, and all of the brokers, all of the traders that are on the floor standing off from the floor, just shaking their heads or in just turmoil, saying how much wealth has just been ruined. This collapse is there's no recovery from this. There's no way to overcome this. That's the picture that we have going on. That's the economic disaster that we have going on. And every ship captain, it says, verse 17, and every ship captain and passenger and sailors and all who make their living at sea stood at a distance. So all of the transportation industry. So now you have all of the traders in the trading pit. You have all of the merchants that are looking on. You have those merchants who maybe hold warehouses full of material goods who say it's worthless now. Or they've lost all the material goods. Now you have all of the transportation industry standing off saying, what are we going to do? Everything is gone. What city is like this great city? This city was where we were able to generate our income. Now it's gone. Now we are destitute because this city has been ruined. And they threw dust on their heads and were crying out, weeping and mourning. Alas, alas, O great city, in her all who had ships at sea grew rich from her wealth, for in a single hour she has been ruined. That's what that economic disaster is going to look like. Utter, complete chaos and collapse, which will bring down the economic system, Maybe it brings down the stock market. Maybe it brings down all of the workers who were working in those fields. Maybe it brings down all of the transportation people who were transporting all of those goods and services. All of a sudden now it's all wiped out and there's no other city that can replace this. And this is all because God's judgment has been poured out upon this city because they are anti-God, and he has called the people of his people. He's called you and I to depart from those places, to not participate in this, because if you do, you will be wiped out as well. Which is a good lesson for us. Be careful what you participate in because it can be wiped out in a single moment. Again, where I said, if you think investing wise, diversify your investments. Don't ever have all your eggs in one basket because in a single instance, it could all be wiped out and ruined. So make sure you are spread across multiple things, but make sure you're also stocking up stuff and make sure you also have things on hand that will help you survive anything that could possibly happen. I'm not saying that today things are going to just fall into chaos and complete dismay, but prepare yourself in case something like that should happen. I'm often reminded of what it says in the book of Genesis with the person of Joseph. If you remember Joseph, Joseph was one of the children of Jacob. His brothers were jealous of him, threw him in a pit. He ended up in Egypt. As he was in Egypt, he rose to power. He rose to being number 2 in the country. God had given a vision to the king, and Joseph interpreted this dream and this vision. And the vision was 7 lean, hungry cows and 7 fat and well-fed cows. And Joseph interpreted this dream for the king, for Pharaoh, and said there will be 7 good years followed by 7 lean years, 7 bad years. During the 7 good years, prepare yourself, store up food so that you can weather the storm during the 7 bad years. I often think of that as a wonderful analogy for how we should approach life. When it's good, make sure you are putting away. You're saving, you're investing, you're stocking up, and you're storing. Make sure you have everything that you need on hand, but make sure you are diversifying every savings amount you can across multiple different sectors, multiple different plans. Don't ever put all of your investments in any one thing, but make sure that during the good times that you are saving, that you're not just spending everything that you possibly have. Cut back on expenses so that you can actually be putting money away in preparation for things that may come. A good lesson that we can learn from this story of Revelation 18 and this judgment that we are seeing poured out. All right, final verse on this page. Verse 20, rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy ones, you saints, you kedoshim, emissaries, that's missionaries, and prophets. For God has judged her condemnation of you. So what is he saying? This city has condemned the Christians. They have persecuted the Christians. They have gone against the Christians, and God is bringing condemnation and judgment on them. If you've ever wondered, God, why aren't you doing more? Why are they getting away with this? Why can't you just punish them for what they're doing to me? This is where punishment occurs. Punishment will ultimately come, but it's not in our timing. It's always in God's timing. He has a plan, and he will accomplish the plan. This plan is going to be carried out against this economic Babylonian system, this Babylonian empire, this Babylonian economic plan and city that has had so much power and control over the world. Everything flows through that, and everything that it has accomplished will be just wiped away in a single hour, and it will affect the entire world. Well, let's wrap up chapter 18 with 4 more verses, verses 21 through 24. Let's look at these together. Then a mighty angel picked up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, so shall Babylon the great city be thrown down with violence, never to be found again. So ultimately this city will be wiped out and destroyed like a millstone thrown into the sea, sinking beneath the waves, sinking beneath the waterline, never to be seen again. This is what will happen to this Babylon, this great city. It will be thrown down with violence, never to be found again. and the sound of the harpists and the musicians and the flautists, so those who played the flute, and the trumpeters shall never be heard in you again. And the craftsman of any craft shall never be found in you again, and the sound of a mill shall never be heard in you again, and the light of a lamp shall never shine in you again, and the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall never be heard in you again. For your businessmen were the tycoons of the world, for all the nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in her was found the blood of the prophets in the Kedoshim, and all those slaughtered on the earth. And so, this is the ultimate picture of what has happened many times in the course of the history of the world. We have seen in many times and in many ways that the world has been utterly changed, really drastically, through the rise and the fall of empires. This is the fall of the final empire. In my estimation, in my understanding, my interpretation of Scripture, and I've said this many times, that the great Babylonian Empire of the end of the age will be a resurrected Islamic empire. It will be a resurgence of what was the Ottoman Empire of a century ago that lasted for about 800 years. There will see a great rise of this Babylonian Empire again. This rise will be Muslim in nature, and it will have drastic impacts upon the Middle East, especially coming after Israel that they hate with a vengeance. There will be an economic power in this Muslim empire that will be judged by God as well. This economic power and this economic influence has tentacles around the entire world. All of the world, all of the leaders and the rulers and the kings of the world will have gotten rich through this economic power that is a Babylonian power that is in this Muslim world. And God will bring destruction upon it, so much so that the city will be wiped out, never to be found again. And this is the same thing that has happened to every world empire. The original empire, the original Babylonian Empire, was no more. It was wiped out and completely gone. The Medo-Persian Empire was the same way. It was once incredibly powerful, then it was wiped out, gone, and no more to be heard of. You had the Greek Empire with Alexander the Great, took over much of the Middle East, and was a great, great empire, and it was destroyed. Now you have the country of Greece, but it's nothing compared to what the Greek Empire was. Then you had the Ottoman Empire, this great Muslim empire that ruled for about 800 years over the Middle East, really controlling much of the trade, and much of the powers of the Middle East was destroyed. It was no longer, but it will come back again. And once it comes back again, it will ultimately be destroyed by God in the final judgments of God. That's Babylon. That's the Babylon Empire, the spiritual empire, and the financial empire. I had mentioned earlier the book by Ray Dalio, and I would highly, again, encourage you to pick that up and read that. That is really an interesting read if you're interested in understanding what's going to be happening in the United States. It's called The Changing World Order, or The Principles for Changing the World Order, Why Nations Succeed and Fail, by Ray Dalio. You'll get an incredible picture of what's happening to our country and how we are a declining empire, really on the verge of losing that empire status and losing the world's reserve currency status as well, only to see a brand new empire rise up and take our place. That's why I believe that as we look at the Bible, we don't see much of the United States in the end times, because our power, while it was significant for several for several centuries, for several decades at least, it's not going to be the same. We are going to lose that power and lose that status, which is why really the United States is not a part of what will happen in the end times. There are references to the young eagle, which I believe is a reference to the United States. You can look at the book of Ezekiel if you want to know more about that. But really, we are not in a position where we are going to be influential anymore. You will see a new world empire rise up, a new power rise up, and God's judgment and destruction will come against that. Now, as we finish chapter 18, in chapter 19, we are going to be getting into looking at what's going on in heaven. And it's incredible things. There's a song that is being sung in heaven. There's victory in heaven. There's a sense that the war is over, that victory has come, that God has finished everything that needed to be finished. Then you have this incredible wedding feast of the Lamb. The wedding of the Lamb is the connection and the joining of the church to the Lamb of God for all time, that we enter into the marriage contract with Jesus himself. And then you see in chapter 19 the final battle of this age, the final battle that is going to happen where God is going to finally win. And then we will start looking at what's going to happen after Jesus comes back, what's going to happen after he sets up his 1,000-year reign upon the world. We're going to see the new Jerusalem at the end of that 1,000 years. So we are almost at the end. We have 4 chapters left, 19 through 22, and then we are going to wrap it up. So 4 more weeks, and we will finish up this study of the book of Revelation. Well, hopefully that was helpful today. I know that there's a lot in there that can be very confusing, but think of it this way, that you have a spiritual Babylon representing the religious system of the world that is anti-God. Then you have an economic Babylon that represents the economic worldly system of the world that is also anti-God. God's judgment will come against both of those things. They will both be highly connected, but God will bring judgment against both of those things. And ultimately, God is going to win. So make sure you are on his side. Make sure you are trusting in him. Make sure you are preparing yourself, both spiritually, physically, and financially, for the things that potentially could be coming our way. Well, thanks for being with me here today, and I look forward to seeing you back here next week for another Bible study in the book of Revelation, where we will cover Revelation chapter 19. Have a great rest of your week. God bless you, and I'll see you back here very soon.